The questions are piling up for President Biden, who now becomes the first president in a century to not hold a solo press conference. 43 days into his term, no Biden alone at the lectern in the White House. It took President Trump 28 days to face reporters, while President Obama took questions in 21 and President George W. Bush 34. Biden has also yet to announce a date for his first speech to a joint session of Congress, which traditionally happens in February. But the White House says there will be no speech until Biden's nearly $2 trillion stimulus bill is signed.
We made a decision internally that we weren't going to have the president propose his forward-looking agenda beyond that. Parts of his Build Back Better agenda still being determined, policy discussions still going on internally, until after that bill is signed, after those checks are going out to Americans, after that vaccine money is going out, after the money is going out to schools.
Although the president hasn't held a solo press conference, it is worth pointing out that the White House has revived daily briefings. Okay, you're watching Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, my co-host Emily Campagno, Fox Business anchor Dagan McDowell, podcast host and former director of Press Advance for President Obama, Johanna Maska, and joining us today, former White House Deputy Chief of Staff and Fox News contributor Karl Rove. So you caught a little smirk on my face there, Karl, because yes, we do see Jen Psaki on a regular basis, but no, we get to ask no follow-ups of this president on the things that really matter. And you know what? That could be why his approval rating is ticking down and his disapproval rating has ticked up in some polling 10%. 10 points.
Well, maybe, but I think his ratings are likely to be going down more because people are looking at the COVID relief bill and saying, what's all that pork in there about? Maybe it would go to, maybe it's that they haven't heard from him, but I think that if they do hear from him, I think the White House view is if they do hear from the president, it might go down a little bit more. I mean, I think they're protecting him. They did this during the campaign. They wisely made a decision that let the focus remain on Donald Trump, hide Joe Biden in the basement in Delaware, and it worked. And I think they've seen since the campaign ended that he's not good at the end of the day, that he's not really good on his feet, and they may be protecting him, hoping to stave off a further decline in his numbers.
Wow. You know, Dagan, when you look at the total picture of this, the president really does have some things to answer for right now, because what's going on at the border, and we don't have to get deep into this, but there are a number of things that are cooking on the stove, if you will, right now.
Right, reopening of the schools, why he is standing up for the teachers' unions over children, why his policies are putting children in harm's way down at the border. Why did they try to act like that there was the cupboard was bare, there was no vaccine, when Biden himself got his second shot before he even took office. So that being said, but part of the problem is in terms of communication, the lack of availability of Joe Biden, and Byron York said this a little bit, is so glaring because President Trump was everywhere all the time. Tweet, 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 talk, 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 all day long, every day. President Trump couldn't walk out to Marine One without doing an extensive chopper chat with the press corps. So folks now just want to know if, who is the Edgar Bergen if Joe Biden is Charlie McCarthy, so to speak. If you like marionettes, who's pulling the strings? But if people are talking about that, if they're even thinking that President Biden is not capable of doing the job or shouldn't be in that position, they might want to think twice, because in terms of left-wing policy, Kamala Harris as president would be a great deal worse for the country.
You know, Johanna, we were talking about just a little while ago last hour that Kamala Harris, speaking of which, and others close to the president were caught off guard with the recent airstrikes that he wanted and deployed. And I'm wondering, is he communicating to a wide enough circle around him? And we need to know that because we don't get to follow up with him. And I'm sorry, one more circle back from Jen Psaki, and it's becoming a drinking game. Go ahead.
You know, he's the first president in more than 100 years to take over the presidency during a global pandemic. So, you know, I think that this administration is getting up and running, focused on the right things, which is getting us back to normalcy. And I don't know about you, Carl, but I often found in the White House that the press were very focused on their access, but the American people want the president focused on their issues. And so on the point of reopening schools, I actually really like that. Yeah, absolutely. The pandemic
you're right
is all of
about
our
that.
issue. And so until we get back.
Yeah, I would just interject, and I don't mean to do anything except for layer in here, because I think it needs to be said. You're saying that the president is tacitly too busy doing the one thing that he said he was going to do, the most important thing to the American people. And the argument to that would be, you can't be too busy to tell us what you're doing about saving our lives. Like, that should be something you would want to tell us and take questions about. All right, Johanna, I won't do it again.
Yeah, I'm not saying he's too busy.
Well, maybe the issue is that he doesn't want to talk that often. I mean, look, let's be honest. You know, he didn't talk much during the campaign. He's not going to want to talk much now. The people around him are not going to want to expose him to this. Whenever he has gone out and had extended give and take, he's often sort of tended to go into weird places. And I don't think they want him as president of the United States to be wandering off into weird places. I bet you a dime to a dollar when they finally do a full-blown presidential news conference, it is either earlier in the day or it's going to be on a day in which he has a very light schedule. Because they know that the times during the campaign where he would talk towards the end of the day were the days that he sort of began to wander into weird places. And it's just, I understand the tendency of the people around him. We don't want the president to be talking if we think that it's going to detract from what we're doing. Let's keep the focus on trying to get the bill passed. We don't need to put him out there and have him absorb the questions from the press, because they will be asking us tough questions. Avoid it as long as possible. Same with the State of the Union address, or we don't call it that in the first year of a presidency. But why have the guy speak until he's actually got an accomplishment, so much of the speech can be spent heralding the success that he's had in that one speech, in that one effort, and then focusing on the next thing he wants to get done.
So again, I bring this up.
I'm not saying he's too busy.
Aren't 2 million shots in arms something to be accomplished? And what if they're still haggling?
Yeah.
Like a month from now? I mean, it's the mind is really. Emily, you're going to wait for the relief bill.
Well.
Oh, he likely is. I'll just say briefly that I think there's a fine line between access and transparency, and thus parsing that line between the press and the people. Every American citizen is vastly interested in what our president's decision-making process is, especially one who has signed and issued over 34 executive orders. This is not a president who has been governing via the legislature, via Congress. He is definitely wielding a lot of power, and I think during the campaign, it was clear that he caved to pressure from challenging questions. Not a year ago, we heard him at a Democratic debate say that he would ban fracking, and he spent the rest of his campaign apologizing for it and figuring out how to retract that statement. Remember, then President Trump made him pay for it severely. So I think it's obvious the gaffes that frankly could have a damaging effect on this policy that he's issued would happen if we had that access and transparency. But the bottom line is that a president is held to a far higher standard than a candidate. And it is incumbent upon this president, especially one, again, who wields the power from his pen, that needs to answer the questions and reveal that transparency to the American people.